Hey everybody, we are now into week 10 of Nursing 5120, the art and science of nursing. In this presentation, I am going to give you my thoughts on the discussion board and some things that have come to my mind as I've read your posts. Overall, the discussion posts have been absolutely outstanding this semester. The topic is heavy, and sometimes I wasn't even sure if the questions that I was asking were clear because they could be interpreted in a multitude of ways. But I want to say that you have really done a fantastic job. I also see a lot of growth in your writing and your ideas and your evolution of thought in terms of art and science of nursing. I'm very impressed. Grades have been very high throughout the semester, and so I really don't have a lot of feedback to give you in terms of improvements. So I'll talk in terms of minor feedback. APA was a reason for some deductions. I'll provide an example on the next page. Sometimes a response to a peer may have been brief or not really added much to the conversation. But for the most part, every single week, everybody's been consistent in providing an excellent response to the peer with an incorporation of the literature as well. So excellent job. There's been times where the original post might have been too brief and lacked some insight, but for the most part, every single one of you had outstanding original posts. There were times where the original post might have been too long. I usually don't deduct marks except if I couldn't see the relevance of everything written in the post. My supervisor for both my master's and my doctoral work used to say to me that parsimony is an art. So, do your best to be succinct. I liked when you used headings so that I knew what part of the question you were answering. And I liked when you took a stand on the question. So even though you were supporting your thoughts with literature, you still stated what your opinion was and what you believed. And I liked when you incorporated an example from your personal life or your practice life. So overall, it's excellent job with your posts. So for the most part, APA was excellent. There were some minor deductions for some minor errors. So on the screen is an example of two correctly cited articles. Where people sometimes made the mistake was the title of the journal. So for example, Clinical Journal of Oncology Nursing, volume 18. Sometimes people forgot to italicize that. Other times people forgot to capitalize the title of the journal. And so there were some minor deductions for that. Sometimes the title of the article was capitalized when you can see in this example here, which is correct, the title, only the first word is capitalized and the word after the colon. So again, very minor errors, but they were errors, so something to think about as we move forward. In week 2, we talked about historical events or people that you felt had a great influence on the nursing profession. Off the top of my head, I remember people mentioning Florence Nightingale, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. We also talked about identifying 1 or 2 factors that influence your personal perspective of nursing. And a lot of you mentioned your own experiences as nurses, your own experiences being a patient or your family experiences of being a patient. And so I would say as well that I've had my own experiences with when my dad was really ill. And I found that a lot of times that because my dad was elderly, English wasn't his first language, my parents are immigrants, they had these thick accents, that people did not adjust the way they talked so that my parents would understand. And so they'd use these huge words and, be very brief with them. And I know my mom would always say, oh, my daughter who's a nurse is going to come and she's got some questions. And when I would come, it seemed like the way the nursing care was offered was a lot different, that they took a little bit more time to discuss things. If they used really big words that I knew my parents didn't understand, I would explain what the word meant. So, yeah, like your own experience with illness definitely is something that will influence your perspective on nursing. I was also thinking about my teaching as well. I've had various types of professors, and my supervisor for my master's and PhD, she was one of those people that she believed in giving extensions if you needed extensions. She believed in supporting students and being collaborative, and that if there was ever family things that came up, the family was most important, so of course you could have an extension. I had other professors that they did not believe in extensions. There was one course, a quantitative course that I took, that we had 3 kind of tests, in-class tests throughout the semester, or papers, I guess. They weren't in class. You had 1 week to write, so you didn't even know what the topic was until 1 week before the due date. And there was no extensions granted, that if you did not hand it in exactly within 1 week, there was going to be a 0 there. And so it was just, for me, that was just extra stress and pressure. And I just didn't like the way that felt. And so that's why I try not to do that for my students. Now, it's interesting because, I feel that I'm flexible as an instructor. I give people the benefit of the doubt. But something that's also impacted is that sometimes students take advantage of that. And I've not had that with the master's level, but with the undergrad. I had a student that she was always asking for extensions. She said she had mental health problems. And of course, we take that seriously. And there was one assignment, it was at the end of the semester, and it was like, you need to get this one done on time because, things need to be marked. So 4 o'clock, the day that it was due, I get an email from the student saying, oh my gosh, my assignment was 95% done, but I put my MacBook on top of my car and I drove away, and now my MacBook is smashed and I don't have a computer to work with. And she even included a picture of a MacBook. And so I was helping my daughter with something at the time, and I said to her, oh, this sounds fishy. So my daughter Googled broken MacBook, and we found the picture online. So she actually stole the picture from Google Images or whatnot. And I go on to the back end of Moodle, and I could see that she had actually not even been in the course in 3 weeks. So there's no way that she was 95% done the assignment if she hadn't even accessed the course in 3 weeks. So unfortunately, this, did change the way that I deal with undergraduate students, where I don't make it sound like I'm very flexible. When I'm introducing myself, I, tell people you need to get your work in on time and there'll be deductions. And then if they come to me and ask for an extension, I'm happy to give it. But it's interesting how some of these some of these things impact the way we practice our teaching, our nursing, or whatnot. In week 3, we discussed the early stages of you articulating your philosophy of nursing, as well as a description of how your practice influences your philosophy. And as you know, this was also written in your major paper for week 6. And something that stood out to me was just the evolution of your ideas between week 3 and week 6. That some of you, had different things to say in your paper compared to what you wrote in the discussion post. And some of you, even during the presentations, when you heard other people talk, you had said, I wish I would have included that. I should have included that in mine. So I think, and then we talked about in, the presentation that, your philosophy was like a work in progress, that it was something that was continuously evolving and changing over time. Something else that stood out to me was people talking about how nurses are known for eating their young. And that's why it was really important to you to be a good mentor to the up and coming generation of nurses. And I wholeheartedly agree that some people are not very forgiving to new nurses that, let's say, ask too many questions, or nurses that, have not had experience with something and need to be shown. And so I think it's wonderful that this group really takes it serious, that they want to mentor this up and coming generation of nurses so that people can be working at their best. In week 4, we discussed where nursing knowledge comes from, what are the sources of knowledge that we use, and is there such a thing as unique nursing knowledge? So this topic I debated as well in my master's degree, which that I did between 2000 and 2004, as well as my PhD, which I believe I started that in 2006. And, it's one of those things that we've debated this for years and years. And given my practical background, I'm just like who really cares? Now I do want to say, I think it's a valuable lesson for us to look at this and to think critically and have an understanding of where the knowledge we use comes from. But I think that when we spend so many hours and, philosophers spend hours and hours debating this, I think there's a point where it's not even productive anymore. And the other thing is something that we discussed in my doctoral studies was, is there even such a thing as original thought or unique knowledge or unique thought? That there might be original ways to express knowledge, thoughts, ideas, concepts, philosophies, but there's no actual original thought, idea, concept, philosophy. It's all been borrowed. When I was reflecting upon this week, on week 4, I ended up doing a Google search on, where does social work, do they borrow their knowledge? And, psychology and medicine, and everybody, there's no such thing as unique. People draw upon the various disciplines from what I saw, and a lot of the disciplines have this debate as well. There was a really good quote in a book called Sociology, Medicine, and Medical Sociology. It says, do all disciplines fret over the state of their own intellectual and policy relevant health? Is it a symptom of our hyper-reflexive and confessional times that collective anxiety has to be rehearsed over the track record and present and projected performance of a group of scholars? Medical sociology's lengthy reflections on the state of its own practice are recognizable as part of a more general trend whereby the certainties of bodies of knowledge and the limits of disciplinary boundaries have been undermined in the light of post-structuralist thought. So to me, that sums it up beautifully. In week 5, we discussed theory. And a lot of you discussed theorists that I actually had never heard about, so it was very educational for me. And I think many of you mentioned that it was difficult to choose one theorist over another because there was overlap between the theorists. And, ideally you'd like to pick and choose certain ideas from certain theorists to make your own theory. Week 8 was, to me, a fascinating discussion and super, super interesting. We talked about what truly is the fundamental advantage of scientific knowledge to nursing. People talked about science in terms of guiding interventions and diagnosing and evidence-based practice, guiding current care, guiding future care. It was a search for truth. And then the second part of the question was, where or when is scientific knowledge not the best source of information? And this is where people talked about relationships, culture, end-of-life care, nursing intuition, judgment, compassion, empathy, care. And somebody asked a very good question. Can art be taught, or is it just who we are as people? Can you teach somebody to be a caring, compassionate person? There was another side conversation on what somebody called skewed knowledge translation, and related to COVID-19 and how this brought up the anti-vaxxers. And it got me thinking about when I was a public health nurse and I would vaccinate for MMR at 12 months and then at 4.5 years of age. And there was a period of time where people did not accept or allow their child to get vaccinated for MMR because there had been like a study done that said that the MMR vaccination was linked with autism. I'm not sure if any of you that are in my age bracket remember that, but it was interesting because then I believe Jenny McCartney, I think is her name, model actress, she had a child with autism. And so then she was then spreading that, kids shouldn't be vaccinated with MMR and it's causing autism. But what was interesting was that that study was actually a fraudulent study. It turned out that there wasn't truth to that study. The scientists skewed the results. And so anyway, it's very fascinating, but absolutely that, skewed knowledge translation or skewed scientific knowledge will impact things in a negative way as well, if that makes sense. I'd have to say my favorite group of posts were the week 9 posts, where we talked about how would ramping up our emphasis on the art change how we practice, how would focusing only on science benefit or hinder us. And I think this is where many of you talked about there needs to be a balance between art and science. And it doesn't do us any good to dichotomize art and science. It's not art versus science. It's art and science. I think that some of you made an excellent point that the art of what we do as nurses is supported by the science. So, there's now been studies done on the importance of nurses showing compassion and being there for their patients, and the importance of building relationships and trusts and connections and things like that. So again, is it even fruitful to have a debate about, what's more important, art or science? And now the other thing that came up, which I think was completely on point as well, is it really does depend on where you're working as to if you're going to be focusing more on science versus art. If you're working in a very technical area, then yeah, you might be focusing more on the science and less on the art. People also talked about needing more time to implement nursing in an artful way. And this, with budget cutbacks and burnout, is often what goes, is not necessarily having the time to connect with your patient or your client. But then somebody else mentioned that some of the things that we can do to connect to our clients really don't take a whole lot of time. Sometimes it's just, simple things that make a huge difference. Even looking at somebody in the eyes when you're talking to them, or, touching somebody in a supportive way and asking them if they're okay. I remember, working as a public health nurse in the Well Child Clinic. And, we had gone from, I think, 30-minute appointments to 20-minute appointments, something like that. And it felt so task-focused, where you couldn't even ask your client, how are you doing? And how is everything going with the baby or with the child? It was all about, how many pees and poops, and, how much sleep and teeth, and there really wasn't that, having that time to connect. And it just felt very, it just really, took the pleasure out of doing that type of nursing. And I remember dreading working in clinic. And I was one of those that would take longer. And I think people were pretty annoyed with me, because sometimes, I would still ask how you're doing, and somebody would burst into tears. Well, I'm not going to kick them out of the room. The other thing that actually this week of discussions got me thinking about was, working perhaps as a nurse scientist. It's so competitive. And I remember when I was a doctoral student, one of my professors, she was my quantitative research professor, great person, brilliant, awesome, fabulous person. But I will never forget that, I had run into her in one of the common areas. And she had said to me, "Oh, I heard that you're helping another student with their fellowship application. We were all expected to apply for fellowships and get funding so that we could take time off of work. And I had applied for a particular fellowship that you could only apply for in your first year. And I didn't end up getting it because I wasn't really sure of what my research was going to be at that time. But anyway, another nurse, she ended up applying for that same fellowship. And this professor actually gave me crap and said to me, "Why are you helping another student with their fellowship? This is so," because I ended up getting a bunch of feedback on my application. So I was going to meet with the student, this peer of mine, and give the feedback so that she didn't make the same mistakes that I made. And so this professor is saying to me, "It's so competitive, and you helping somebody else means that it's taking money away from you, and it's taking funding away from you. And why would you be helping somebody else?" And I kind of just I usually laugh when I get uncomfortable. I think I laughed. I'm like, I said, I can't get the fellowship anyway because I can't apply for it now. She's like, it doesn't matter. These fellowships make you more marketable, and her resume is going to look better than yours for other types of awards and whatnot. But it got me thinking about, working as a researcher. You really are focusing on the science. It's very competitive, and depending on the university you work at, and depending on the type of professor you are, some people are way more focused on their research and less focused on their students. Excuse me, when the whole purpose of us teaching at a university is about teaching the students. Anyway, I hope that example made sense. So those are my thoughts on the discussion board post to date. Thanks for listening, and thanks again for all your contributions to the discussion board, and just taking the time to write these really reflective, insightful discussion posts, which I know at times have been frustrating because it probably feels like there's been overlap between the weeks, and sometimes it might feel a little bit difficult to come up with something different. But I've seen really huge growth and evolution in your thoughts, and have just been super, super impressed.